I've always despised weddings. Not because I don't believe in love, I once embraced it with every ounce of my being, but because weddings expose people's true nature, especially when you're watching from the sidelines. The May afternoon sun beat down as we arrived at my sister Olivia's extravagant venue. Everything sparkled in white and gold under the California sunshine. Her future in-laws, the Hunters, had obviously spared no expense. My mother Eleanor adjusted her designer shawl with practiced precision while I balanced my son Evan on my hip, 3 years old, rosy-cheeked, and blissfully unaware of the tension crackling in the air around us. I hadn't wanted to come. Evan had been struggling with his sensory issues all week, I was bone-tired, and Mother had been criticizing my parenting for months. But she insisted with that cold, unyielding tone of hers, "We are not creating a scene. It's your sister's wedding. Just try to look presentable for once." So I pulled my hair back, squeezed into the navy blue dress she'd selected, and rehearsed my smile until the mirror reflected something resembling normalcy. We found our seats near the front, right behind Olivia and Wesley. Mother was practically glowing with pride. She always adored her younger daughter, certainly more than she ever did me. I shifted Evan onto my lap and reached for Mother's hand, seeking some connection. My fingers barely touched hers when she recoiled as if scalded. She leaned in, her voice razor-sharp but quiet. "Don't embarrass us. You're just here as Evan's caretaker today. Look pleasant. Stay silent." My chest constricted, like someone had hollowed out everything human inside me, leaving only an empty shell. I forced a light laugh, praying no one noticed, hoping no one heard. I glanced at the other family members, polished, composed, wondering if they too felt reduced to mere props in someone else's perfect story. I didn't cry. Not then. When the speeches began, I sat motionless. Mother went first, dramatically recounting stories of Olivia's childhood achievements. William Hunter followed with practiced humor that earned polite chuckles. Then it was Olivia's turn, her voice carrying as she spoke about dreams and perfect futures. Then unexpectedly, the microphone came to me. Would the sister of the bride like to say something? Wesley smiled, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my skin. Mother turned to me sharply. "That's not necessary," she said, more command than suggestion. But I stood anyway, taking the microphone that felt foreign and impossibly heavy in my trembling hand. My heart hammered so violently I barely registered the hush that fell over the reception hall. All eyes locked on me, Mother's gaze burning with warning. I began, my voice weaker than intended. I cleared my throat, squared my shoulders, and tried again. "Thank you for this opportunity. I wasn't prepared, but weddings are significant moments, aren't they? Moments we carry with us." A few polite nods from the crowd. "I remember when I was married," I said, briefly glancing at Mother, whose face froze in a tight, controlled smile. "I was 29. Nervous but hopeful. I believed I was starting a life with someone who truly saw me." Someone shifted uncomfortably at one of the tables. I smiled broader, as if this were just a light-hearted introduction. "I remember thinking, this is the beginning of our story together. You dream about the little things, don't you? Sunday breakfast together, discussing future plans and whispered conversations, having someone hold your hand when you're exhausted and covered in your child's spilled juice." A nervous murmur rippled through the guests. Mother tilted her head, a silent warning I knew all too well. "But sometimes," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "you wake up years later and realize you've become invisible. You're no longer valued as a person. You're just background furniture, or worse, an inconvenience." I heard silverware clatter against china. The silence felt suffocating. Only Evan's innocent babbling broke the tension as he played with his toy truck, oblivious to the drama unfolding. My hand trembled as I gripped the microphone tighter. I looked directly at Mother now. "And sometimes the person who should support you, who once claimed you were the daughter they were proud of, will recoil when you reach for connection. Not because they're angry, but because they've forgotten you're a person with feelings." My voice wavered, but I pushed forward. "Olivia, Wesley," I turned to the newlyweds, "I hope you always truly see each other, even when life becomes chaotic and exhausting. Because once you stop seeing each other, it's not a relationship anymore. It's just a performance." I handed back the microphone and stepped down. My heart pounded. I avoided everyone's eyes, just reached for Evan, who was now with my father Joseph, and clutched him protectively against my chest. Mother didn't follow immediately. When she did, it was outside the venue, near the garden, where the music faded and only the evening breeze remained. "What was that disgraceful display?" she hissed, eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Have you lost your mind?" I spoke honestly, I said softly. She moved closer, imposing. You humiliated our entire family. I met her gaze. No. I simply reminded everyone that I exist. Her lips thinned to a line. Go back to the house. We'll discuss this later. She didn't offer to help with Evan. Didn't even acknowledge him. She turned and strode back to the celebration as if she hadn't left her daughter crumbling in her wake. I drove home alone, Evan sleeping in his car seat, and for the first time since James died, I allowed myself to cry without shame. The morning after the wedding, Mother acted as if nothing had happened. She prepared her tea, patted Evan's head dismissively, and scrolled through her social media like it was any ordinary Sunday. I stood in the doorway watching her like she was a stranger who'd invaded my space. My shoulders ached from carrying Evan's weight all day, my mind foggy from another sleepless night. But she didn't really look at me. She never truly did. I'm attending church, she announced coldly, expecting no response. Your sister and Wesley will be visiting at 4. Don't mention your little performance yesterday. I stared. That's all you have to say? She paused briefly. What more is there to discuss? I remained silent. It was pointless. Mother never offered apologies. Not to me. We weren't always this way. When James was alive, our relationship had some warmth, occasional dinners, short phone calls, the basic civility that passes for family connection. She noticed some things then. How I excelled in nursing school, the patients who wrote me thank you letters, how dedicated I was to my hospital unit. But everything shifted after James died. Gradually at first. She began critiquing how I grieved in public. She stopped acknowledging my accomplishments. Then when Evan's developmental issues became apparent, she seemed disgusted, not openly cruel, just coldly disappointed, as if I'd failed by producing a child who wasn't perfect. When I moved into her guest house, she barely helped with Evan. She claimed she didn't know how to handle children like him, but years passed. She never tried to learn. I managed everything alone, the therapy appointments, the sensory meltdowns, the sleepless nights, the specialist visits. When I asked once if she'd watch him for an hour, she scoffed, "You're his mother. That's your responsibility." It wasn't just responsibility. It was isolation. It was endurance. When Olivia and Wesley arrived that afternoon, I wore the same practiced smile I'd perfected over months. My sister immediately commented on my dramatic wedding speech. You barely said anything, she remarked lightly, sipping her wine. Very controlled. That little speech of yours has everyone whispering. Mother's jaw tightened visibly. I nodded politely. Sometimes truth makes people uncomfortable. She tilted her head. Oh, was that truth? There was no overt hostility in her tone, just that passive-aggressive disapproval that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. I wondered if she'd ever challenged my father before their separation. Unlikely. Women in our family were conditioned to maintain appearances, even while breaking inside. After they departed, Mother ignored me completely. For hours. She scrolled through social media while I helped Evan with his bath, read his favorite story 3 times, cleaned the kitchen, and organized his therapy materials. I might as well have been invisible. Near midnight, I found her on the patio, staring vacantly at the garden. I meant everything I said yesterday, I told her softly. She remained facing away. You made our family look dysfunctional. You made me feel non-existent. She finally turned. Playing the victim now, is that it? I shook my head. No. I'm just finished being erased. She laughed coldly. You're not leaving. You depend on me. No career, no savings, a special needs child. You're trapped. She stated it calmly, as if reciting an immutable law of nature. I walked back inside without another word. For the first time since moving in, I allowed myself to envision life away from her control. The following morning, I started making lists. Nothing dramatic, not escape routes or revenge tactics. Just practical necessities, housing options, job applications, childcare facilities. It felt strangely distant, like organizing someone else's future. Yet each item written brought fragmentary clarity. I'd been a pediatric nurse before Evan was born. Dedicated, respected, steady income. I hadn't practiced in 3 years. Mother insisted it was impractical for me to work. She provided housing. Besides, what responsible mother leaves her special needs child with strangers just to change bedpans and take vitals? Nevertheless, I registered for an online recertification course, quietly after Evan slept. The first time I logged in, tears welled up. Not from sadness, but because I reconnected with the professional I once was. Not the perpetually inadequate daughter who couldn't fold towels correctly or manage her son's meltdowns properly. Mother never noticed my studies, or chose not to mention them. She spent evenings at community meetings and charity functions. She claimed it was maintaining connections. I didn't question this. The rhythms of avoidance were too familiar. One Tuesday, Evan's sensory issues flared severely. I called Mother at her committee meeting. "He's overwhelmed," I explained. "I need help getting him to his therapy appointment." A pause followed. Then Mother's voice, frigid and annoyed, came through. "Handle it yourself. Why disturb me for everything?" "I don't," I responded, stunned. "This is actually the first time I'm in an important discussion." Click. I struggled to get Evan into the car alone and waited at the clinic for 2 hours while he screamed. When the therapist asked if grandmother was coming, I simply said, "No, she's occupied." That evening, while Evan finally slept, I secretly applied for nursing positions. I had references from former colleagues who still respected my work ethic. Each application felt like reclaiming stolen dignity. The following week, I submitted applications for 3 hospital positions, night shift options. They paid moderately well, but the salary wasn't my focus. They represented proof. Proof that I remained capable, that I still existed beyond motherhood. One hospital, St. Mary's Medical Center, sent me an email after my interview. "We were impressed by your experience and understanding of pediatric care. Thank you for considering us." I read those words repeatedly. They were simple, but no one had expressed appreciation in months, maybe years. Mother rarely spoke directly to me now, and when she did, it was terse, demanding. "Evan needs more therapy exercises. We're out of his special snacks. The bathroom needs cleaning." One evening as I organized Evan's therapy cards, she entered holding a shirt I hadn't properly folded. "Your standards are slipping," she remarked coldly. I looked up at her. Really looked. Time hadn't been kind. The lines around her mouth only deepened when she delivered her criticisms. I said nothing, just returned to my task. She lingered momentarily, clearly expecting apologies, but I offered none because I wasn't her subordinate anymore. 2 weeks after Evan's meltdown, I received a job offer that surpassed my expectations, night shift supervisor at the Children's Hospital. It wasn't perfect timing, but it offered legitimate responsibilities and actual income. Most importantly, it provided validation. I studied for recertification after Evan fell asleep. Sipping lukewarm tea, I reviewed medical procedures until my vision blurred. It wasn't simple, but it provided something Mother couldn't control. Purpose. I began researching apartments, calculating budgets, selling unused items online, quiet preparations, nothing obvious. I couldn't risk her noticing my intentions. Not yet. Then something unexpected occurred. A former colleague messaged me, "Hey, noticed your license renewal came through. Still interested in nursing? Madeline." We hadn't connected in nearly 4 years. "Yes," I replied immediately. "Night availability only. Special needs son. Coffee next Tuesday? I'm supervising at Memorial now." My chest tightened anxiously. Mother would disapprove. She disliked anyone who reminded me of my former independence. Nevertheless, I accepted. We met at a quiet cafe near the hospital. Safe territory. I applied makeup for the first time in forever. Not from vanity, for confidence. Madeline looked unchanged. Dark curly hair, piercing eyes, infectious energy. "You look well," she said, embracing me. Exhausted, but resilient. I attempted a smile. "That's special needs parenting." We discussed nursing developments, mutual acquaintances, healthcare changes. I presented the sanitized version of my circumstances. She wasn't fooled. "Level with me," she asked softly. "I'm not prying, but you seem like someone barely breathing." I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "I'm just trying to reclaim myself." Her expression softened. "If you need support, real support, I'm here. The pediatric unit needs experienced nurses. We have benefits for parents of special needs children. I could recommend you." I stared in disbelief. "You'd really do that?" She nodded firmly. "You were exceptional. I always thought you deserved better." That night, sleep eluded me. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the nurse who thrived in emergency situations and earned colleagues' respect, not just the incompetent daughter and inadequate mother I'd become. 2 days later, I submitted my application. I told Mother nothing. She discovered it the following week when hospital correspondence arrived. "What's this?" she demanded, brandishing the envelope accusingly. "A job offer. I'm returning to nursing." "Working?" She glared intensely. "You should have consulted me first." "I tried," I replied evenly. "You simply didn't hear me." She exited without responding. No shouting. Not immediately. That worried me more. That evening, I secured my documents. Then I messaged Madeline, "I'm accepting the position." "Thank you." She responded immediately, "Orientation starts Monday. Welcome back." The orientation was over video call. I wore my old nursing scrubs, still fitting though untouched since before Evan's diagnosis, and sat in the small alcove of the guesthouse where Mother's influence felt less oppressive. Isabella Rodriguez, the nursing director, was direct, professional, and genuinely interested. She didn't question my career gap. She asked about my pediatric experience, crisis management skills, and how I handled parents of special needs children. For 40 minutes, I wasn't a grieving widow. I wasn't just Evan's mother. I was a professional again. When we finished, she nodded approvingly. "We'll formalize everything soon," but Madeline's recommendation was significant. "We need experienced pediatric nurses." The moment the call ended, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Evan made a sound on the monitor, breaking my trance. I closed the laptop, lifted him from his bed, and carried him through the house against my heart, softly singing his favorite melody. I didn't officially have the position yet, but I possessed something more valuable than certainty. I had possibility. That evening, Mother returned later than usual. Her hair was perfectly styled despite the hour, her expression calculating. "Another committee meeting?" I asked, too exhausted for pretense. She nodded curtly. "Foundation business." I didn't inquire further. She offered nothing more. She surveyed me, then examined the room, tidier than normal, Evan's toys organized, dinner dishes washed. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You seem unusually energetic." "Just finished cleaning," I lied. "Actually exhausted." She studied me as if filing away that response. "As you should be, with everything I provide." Then she walked to her room without further comment. That week, I received confirmation. The position was mine. 3 12-hour night shifts weekly, benefits including special needs childcare support, starting salary sufficient for independent living. "Consider carefully before accepting," Isabella advised. "No consideration needed," I replied firmly. "I'm prepared." And I genuinely was. Tears came after our conversation ended. Not from anxiety or remorse, from pure liberation. I called Madeline with gratitude. She responded, "Now develop your independence plan. You need and accomplish everything immediately, but remaining in this situation isn't sustainable." Her assessment was correct. This transcended employment. It concerned well-being. Mother never struck me physically. She never would. But her manipulation represented another form of abuse. Subtle, methodical, disguised behind concerned expressions that never reached her eyes. The following day, I researched childcare options for special needs children. I contacted a family resource center, not for immediate assistance, but to understand available support services. I began investigating affordable apartments and memorizing monthly costs. I cleared my browser history nightly, concealing documents in a folder marked Evan's therapy exercises. I maintained a pleasant demeanor around Mother, kept the pantry stocked, Evan's routines consistent, never providing reasons for her scrutinizing disapproval. Nevertheless, one evening as I passed the living room, I sensed her observation. I turned cautiously. She sat in her armchair, hands perfectly folded, expression calculating. "You've been quite active lately," she remarked. I tensed. Between Evan and preparation for work, there's always something. For someone who claimed I lacked motivation, I seemed to have discovered considerable energy. I steadied my voice. "Perhaps I'm finally finding some balance." She nodded once. "Balance?" She offered nothing further, didn't smile, simply observed as I walked away. My fingers trembled when I reached the guest house. The morning after Mother's surveillance, I woke before dawn. Evan still slept peacefully, his gentle breathing centering my thoughts. I made tea, checked messages, and discovered my orientation schedule from Isabella. "Welcome to Memorial Children's," it stated. I studied those words intently. They represented more than employment. They signified possibilities. Possibilities meant independence. That afternoon, I took a significant risk. I viewed an apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. Worn carpet, basic appliances, but clean, secure, and financially feasible. I told the property manager I was just exploring options, but photographed everything. I inquired about security deposits. I committed the address to memory. When I returned, Mother waited in the kitchen. She looked up immediately as I entered. "You were absent." Not a question, an accusation. "Yes," I acknowledged. "Errands." She glanced pointedly at my single shopping bag. "Hardly seems worth the trip." "Just Evan's special snacks and medication." She assessed me silently, expression unreadable. That evening, while helping Evan with his bath, I realized I was humming softly. I hadn't done that since James died. I dried Evan carefully, helped him into pajamas, and settled him into bed. For a brief, hopeful moment, I believed we could escape peacefully. Just us. No confrontations, no drama. Then my phone rang. Father's name appeared. He spoke briefly, voice concerned. Then he said, "Your mother wants to speak with you." I hesitated. We'd barely communicated directly in days. Her voice sounded controlled, but something felt wrong. "Abigail, your father mentioned you're working at the hospital now. He said you seem overwhelmed with everything." My chest tightened. "What?" "I'm concerned," she continued. "Eleanor believes you're making rash decisions, possibly from depression. She says you're neglecting Evan's needs. She mentioned you're pursuing inappropriate employment." The room tilted. "I'm perfectly fine," I insisted. "Don't believe her manipulations." "I'm merely checking on you," he said cautiously. "Perhaps consider professional help." After ending the call, I confronted Mother in the main house. "You contacted Dad about me." She remained impassive. "He inquired about your situation." "You told him I was mentally unstable." I expressed legitimate concerns, which remain valid. I stared directly at her. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're clearly making poor decisions. If you can't recognize that, someone must intervene." It was calculated, methodical, like poison administered with surgical precision. She aimed to discredit me should I attempt independence. She constructed her narrative gradually, deliberately, precisely as she always operated. That night, I gathered every essential document, employment contract, childcare applications, apartment information. I secured them in Evan's therapy bag, beneath his sensory tools. I prepared an emergency travel kit, medications, comfort items, specialized snacks, extra clothes, and stored it in my car. I confided in nobody, now understanding, Mother wouldn't permit my departure. She required absolute control, and I refused to remain controlled. The following week passed in heightened vigilance. I prepared quietly for my hospital orientation, helping Evan with therapy exercises while reviewing medical protocols. Evenings were spent verifying details, banking information, apartment application, document safekeeping. I memorized routes, emergency contacts, and support services locations. I confided in no one, not even Madeline. Despite my caution, I sensed impending confrontation. Mother's demeanor transformed subtly. She abandoned pretense and interrogation. She'd stand silently observing my activities without comment. She'd close her planner when I approached. She'd reminisce about better times before James died, before Evan's diagnosis, the way people do when attempting to remind you of your designated role, your prescribed identity. Then unexpectedly, she returned with a gift. A framed photo of James holding newborn Evan, my treasured memory. She hadn't acknowledged this photograph in years. "Perhaps we should start communicating better," she suggested, positioning it prominently as if offering reconciliation. "Return to functioning as family." I nodded carefully. "That's considerate." She prepared tea, seated herself nearby, not touching me, just occupying my space. "You've changed recently," she observed. "More secretive, less present." "I've been managing numerous responsibilities." She studied me deliberately. "Nevertheless, you should depend on me more. If problems exist, simply discuss them." I examined her expression. This wasn't genuine concern. It was monitoring disguised as empathy. "Everything's fine," I responded quietly. Her delayed response felt calculated. "Good. Family coherence remains essential." That evening, checking my documents, I discovered my nursing credentials missing from their hiding place. My employment contract vanished. My stomach knotted painfully. I didn't panic. I contacted the hospital for replacement documentation and secured it digitally where she'd never access it, in an encrypted file labeled Evan's Medical History 2022. The following morning, I took Evan to the special needs childcare center connected to the hospital. The facility featured sensory-friendly spaces with a compassionate coordinator named Joseph who welcomed us warmly. Through the observation window, I watched Evan cautiously approach another child with similar challenges. For the first time since planning my departure, I felt not guilt but affirmation. Afterward, I purchased a prepaid phone with cash. That evening, I contacted my father, a conversation I'd postponed yet knew was necessary. He answered immediately. "Dad," I said, voice unsteady. "I'm accepting the hospital position. Evan and I need to leave Mother's house. Possibly tomorrow." He asked nothing I couldn't answer. "I've prepared the apartment above the garage," he said simply. "Come whenever you're ready." Returning to the guest house, I found Mother waiting, her reading glasses perched precisely, her gaze immediately locking with mine. Her smile appeared rehearsed and unsettling. "Another outing today?" "Yes," I acknowledged. "Childcare arrangements." "You've been making numerous arrangements lately." I moved past her. Didn't react when she rose behind me. Maintained composure externally, but internally recognized the moment of decision had arrived. That night, sleep eluded me completely. I lay in my bed in the guest house, perfectly still, listening to the main house for any movement, silent, waiting, as if she hadn't transformed our living situation into a strategic battleground, as if she hadn't already begun her campaign. At 5:30 a.m., I slipped into Evan's room. He stirred briefly, then returned to peaceful sleep, his favorite blanket clutched tightly. I gently touched his hair. By 6:15, darkness still enveloped the neighborhood. I carefully dressed Evan in comfortable clothes, gathered his comfort objects, and quietly exited through the side door. The morning air felt crisp against my face as I unlocked the car, hoping the sound wouldn't travel to the main house. The emergency supplies waited securely in the trunk. The prepaid phone contained my father's address and directions. I secured Evan in his specialized car seat, positioned myself behind the wheel, and gripped it with determination, my fingers trembling slightly. I resisted looking toward the house, until the kitchen light suddenly illuminated. Mother stood framed in the doorway, still in her robe, watching intently. For several seconds, she remained motionless. Then deliberately, she began approaching. I started the engine immediately. I didn't wait to witness her reaction. I didn't pause to hear her manipulations. I drove through the silent suburban streets, past darkened windows. Every intersection felt threatening. Every car headlight triggered anxiety. At 7:02 a.m., I arrived at my father's house. Joseph, his expression concerned but without judgment, met us in the driveway. He asked nothing. He simply embraced us both and guided us inside. He had prepared a bedroom with Evan's favorite dinosaur sheets and a small nightlight. For the first time since James died, I relaxed completely without underlying tension. I couldn't predict what challenges tomorrow would bring. I couldn't anticipate what custody arrangements might develop or what fabrications Mother would create. But this remained certain: we had escaped. We were protected. And I would never surrender our freedom again. 3 months later, I stood in my nursing uniform holding a microphone at Wesley's promotion celebration. Olivia had called earlier that week. "Wesley and I thought you should speak. Your comments at our wedding, everyone remembers them." I nearly smiled at the irony but accepted. The gathering was intimate, primarily colleagues and family members. Mother attended, naturally. She positioned herself near the entrance, posture perfect, pretending I was invisible. She had already circulated her narrative, claiming I suffered postpartum depression years after childbirth, that I'd neglected Evan's care. She told family friends I was receiving psychiatric treatment. She informed neighbors I kidnapped my son without justification. These fabrications held no power now. I possessed evidence, documentation of Evan's progress in his new therapy program, witnesses to Mother's behavior, medical professionals who supported my parenting. I had legal representation, a compassionate but resolute advocate who identified Mother's manipulation tactics immediately. The family mediation process had only begun and would continue for some time. But this moment belonged to me. I inhaled deeply and addressed the gathering. When I spoke at Olivia's wedding, I emphasized the importance of truly seeing one another. I meant every word. What I couldn't express then, what I hadn't fully realized, was that sometimes you must recognize your own worth first, because others may never acknowledge it. Attentive silence filled the room. For years I believed I was inadequate, that I should remain quiet, invisible, grateful. I convinced myself that if I performed perfectly, appreciation would follow. That criticism was temporary. That emotional neglect was circumstantial. It wasn't. I glanced up. Mother remained motionless, though her expression tightened noticeably. I chose independence, I stated clearly. It was the most difficult decision I've ever made. Not because I lacked family loyalty, but because I finally valued my son's well-being and my own dignity above others' expectations. No applause followed. None was necessary. The silence itself conveyed understanding. I returned the microphone, stepped away from the podium, and as I passed Mother, I met her eyes directly for the first time since leaving. She remained silent, having nothing of consequence remaining to express. At my father's apartment that evening, I held Evan close as he drifted towards sleep and whispered the same promise repeatedly into his ear: "We are growing stronger."